right.
Hello, everybody. We didn't realize we were the last show of
bringing down the show
of the day, so we'll try and be super compelling.
We're all that stands between this crowd and the delights that New Orleans has got.
Exactly. I feel like I'm sitting like in front of you here, so I'm going to slide back.
Okay.
Well, thanks for being here. We're going to talk about daily fantasy sports and just more like sports content and fantasy sports more broadly, not specific to daily, but. Real quick, because I don't know, I don't want to assume everyone here kind of even knows what daily fantasy sports is. I think it might be helpful. Can you give us like a 30-second overview of what it is you guys actually do?
Absolutely. So fantasy sports has been played in America and worldwide for over 50 years. It's the idea where you construct a virtual team made up of real-world players and score points based on their performance. Typically, you play in a group of friends of 10 or 12 friends. You play that game throughout the season, through NFL, baseball, basketball, soccer. About 7-8 years ago, we came up with an innovation which was with season-long, traditional. It took the entire season. We said, well, that's pretty long, right? Why don't we make it just last one day and make it a lot faster? And so that's what we did. So daily fantasy sports is like season-long if you ever played it. Only the games only last one day.
Got it. So it's for maybe a shorter attention span, or it gives you more times to compete. Right?
Exactly. It's kind of like for that younger, more millennial audience, you're like, 4 months is a very long time. One day, we can play that.
So during the intro, they mentioned that your company, FanDuel, has reached an agreement to merge with DraftKings, which was for a while your arch rival, your arch nemesis. Now you guys are going to be friends. How is that process going? Can you give us an update on kind of where you're at?
Sure. So, the background to that is, what we discovered in this process, and a lot of entrepreneurs find this, is that they go into an industry to disrupt that industry, to disrupt the incumbents. The ESPN, for us, that was ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, and these were guys who'd been around for, attacked by a fly here.
Bug likes both of us. Yeah.
These are guys who've been dominant for 10, 15 years, and there hadn't been any innovation, and we were like, look, we can do it new, we can make this a really mobile experience. And so we came into the market and really demonstrated a new way of playing. And DraftKings came in a couple of years later and really took what we did and added a lot of other things to it and really innovated, started push new boundaries, new product innovation. And what we kind of discovered, when we started in a discussion 1.5 years ago was that we were really trying to do the same thing. We were wanting to compete against the ESPN, Yahoos of the world. These companies were much bigger than us. And it just made no sense putting all our resources to, it made more sense to put our resources together that we could compete. Right. Just a very typically, I think an analogy I said earlier, we both have about 300 employees. We both have about 150 people in product development. And when I look at what our 150 people do, you find that about 60% of them are building the platform, doing payments, doing compliance, payments processing. And so those are kind of, those are necessary work. But when you look at what was freed up to do innovation, it was actually fairly small. And whenever I got together with Jason, who's the CEO of DraftKings, we said, hey, what if we could put these teams together, we go to one platform, and then we free up 150 people to focus purely on innovation. And that really is the selling point.
Well, and it's not spending money trying to basically compete against someone who's doing exactly what you're doing, right? So.
Yeah, and the money really is there to grow the market. So just to give you an idea, 57 million people play fantasy sports in North America. Only about 3 million of them play daily fantasy. And so the opportunity is to go from that 3 to 57 million. And those 57 millions on ESPN, Yahoo, and CBS.
Why is it such a small percentage, and how do you basically take advantage of the fact that 54 million people like fantasy sports enough to play season long?
Yeah.
They probably know about you because you guys were all over TV with your ads, which I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
How come 54 million people have said, I like fantasy sports, but I don't like it enough to do what you're offering?
Yeah, I think the first one is they had a 20-year head start.
Sure.
So that's definitely a factor. The other one is, what we find is that, we've converted a lot of users, but I think as we find that, as we go beyond that 3 million to 5 to 10 million, one of the ways our product has to get better is become more social. So something we launched last football season was a more social version of FanDuel. It was called Friends Mode. DraftKings launched something called Leagues, which was very similar. And really the idea was to have the great, the excitement of a single-day fantasy league, but bring in your friends, and so you're playing social with friends. That's something that season long has done really well, and it's something that we only really introduced in the last 6 to 8 months. And so that's something as we go to 5 to 10 to 20 million players, we'll do better.
Okay, so it's more popular when you're playing with your friends.
That's right, yeah.
So I mentioned the TV stuff, and maybe this is a good way to kind of go into the media side of what it is that you do, but also what you kind of the benefits maybe you provide some of your partners.
Sure.
But I want to start with the media stuff. So a couple years ago, when you guys were not friends, you were frenemies, probably just enemies. You were spending a lot of money on TV, tens of millions of dollars in advertising and all that.
Yeah.
Last season, you scaled that back. You said, "Hey, we probably went a little bit too far. We're going to take it." Where do you land now? Like, are you somewhere in the middle? Was the ad blitz from 2 years ago a pretty good idea? Like, what's going to happen this year?
Yeah, like, I say when you look back at the evolution of the company, like the first challenge any startup has is nobody's heard of you, right? And so that's the thing, when you're competing against an ESPN or Yahoo, the first problem you have is nobody's heard of you. You might have an amazing product, but let me tell you, you build it, unless people find out about it, they don't come. And we had to find a way to get in front of people. We knew the people that played our product loved it, and so we had to find a way to get out there. So in 2015, yes, we spent a lot of money, we got in front of a lot of people, and that was very effective. We have something like brand awareness in the 80%, which we still have today. 2016 came around and we were like, look, it's going to be less about brand awareness. We've got that. But what we do need to do is to continue to work on the reasons why people play the product. And so something like launching the social product, Friends Mode, was what we did in 2016. As we look forwards to this year, I think it's scaling on 2016. It's certainly not yet at the level of 2015 was, but I think it's kind of the marketing strategy is evolving, which is we will be spending more, but we'll be talking more about some of the aspects we learned last year, like the social aspects of the product. We'll be selling more of that.
Gotcha. And so right now, do you have a partner for that social element? Like, I mean, is there a Facebook or a Twitter or someone like who does social, who does connections that you can actually rely on to help with this, or are you guys doing this all on your own?
We pretty much build it ourselves. Like, what you find is that with fantasy leagues, those friends may be on Facebook, but a lot of them are not.
Yeah.
They may be on Twitter, but a lot of them are not. And so you're like a very typical fantasy league social network, as it were, will be a group of college buddies. And so therefore, they're people that you've known for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And so they will be kind of quite disparate, even geographically quite disparate. And the one thing that pulls that group together is you play fantasy league together. And so we sort of need to recreate that social group on our platform.
Is there a way to lure? So right now, how it works for those who don't know, or not all the games, but a lot of them, you put in a couple bucks, right? Everyone plays together. Everyone puts in $5. We have $50 in the pool, and you get first place, so you get 40 of it. I get second, so I get 10, and somewhere along the line, you guys take a little cut, right? The money is a motivating factor for some to play.
Yeah.
Is there a business model out there that still enables you to make money, but that doesn't involve you and me having to put money up front, like advertising, subscription? Like, have you considered other?
And we've been evolving that over the last year, and so there very much is a model, and the likes of ESPN and Yahoo have been very successful on it. Because they had a much bigger player base, they actually could do products where they have real prizes, but monetize it through advertising. We've only really built that out in the last 12 months, and we're working on that because what we find is, of our user base, we have a big paying user base, but there's an even bigger audience out there that would like to play, but maybe don't want to put in the $5, $10, $20, $30. And so we can monetize that through partnerships. Then that's a good way to go. And to give you a couple of examples, at the moment we're doing a partnership with with Bud Light around the NBA, and so that's the road to the NBA Finals. And that's a free to enter contest, and it's prizes and really sponsored by Bud Light.
Gotcha. So they're putting up the
put up the prizes.
Carrot.
Yeah.
Have you guys considered doing? Right now, you're doing daily fantasy. Have you considered just doing traditional season-long fantasy to try and get some of those 54 million people you talked about in the door, and then once they start using FanDuel to do their season-long fantasy league, maybe they'll say, oh, this is actually a good place to do daily too?
Like all the things are kind of on the table. I think what we tend to look at is like we do think that daily is a better version, but we do look at season-long and say it does some things well. Like it does it creates the social aspect well, better than daily's done historically. And so we're like, how do we learn from that? We certainly always do look at it and say, is there a demographic of people that would only play season long, and therefore we would need to have a season long product? But I think at the moment, most of the focus on is what does season long do well, and therefore what are those things that we would want to roll into our product?
Right. I want to talk a little bit about media. So you guys have argued in the past, and I think it's a valid argument, that the NFL should love, FanDuel, because if I'm playing fantasy football, I'm probably going to watch more football, right? What's your relationship? But at the same time, I'll point out the NFL teams have worked with you guys, but the NFL as a league has never been an official partner or anything. What's your relationship like with the league? Is the NFL I kind of think of them as the biggest when it comes to fantasy sports. I guess, how do you think of them fitting into what you do?
So the NFL is the biggest in terms of people who play fantasy. Like fantasy football is the biggest sport. Historically, baseball was number 2, although I would say potentially basketball is overtaking them.
Up.
Actually, from a revenue perspective, basketball is already number 1 for us, bigger than football. But from a user perspective, basketball would be number 2.
Yeah.
In terms of our relationship, so we have partnerships with the NBA, and then with about half of the NBA teams, and then about half of the NFL teams. And those are exclusive partnerships. We also have a very good relationship with the NFL, who decided not to go down the kind of exclusive partnership route. But they absolutely get it. The teams get it, the leagues get it. They see that their biggest concern, and any league's biggest concern is viewership, and then viewership, particularly among that younger demographic.
Right.
And they say, look, we can't continue to grow our audience just by doing the same thing. We have to find new ways to engage our audience, and we have to make the experience more engaging. We have to make it, we can't just be a sit back experience. How do we engage that audience? And they understand that fantasy sports is one of the best ways to do it.
We were talking backstage about how 18 to 34, that millennial audience is shrinking for the NFL, which is weird to say. Because the NFL has been so dominant for so long, and it still is very dominant, but just younger people are not watching the NFL on TV as much as they used to. Do you think that you guys can bring 18-year-olds to television? Are you doing that now?
I think absolutely we can. And yes, it is I think from the NFL perspective, it's a worrying stat that, last year a lot of noise about the NFL declining, and everybody said, well, it's at 1 year. The more interesting stat is that the NFL viewership among millennials has declined for 3 straight years. I think absolutely we're doing a lot there because our core audience is that 18 to 35-year-old, which is about 60% of our audience. I think we're definitely bringing them to the games. How they're consuming the games may not be sit in front of the TV for 3 hours, but they're certainly now engaged. They're wanting to bring it up on their phone. They're watching bits of the games because they suddenly have an interest in that game. And there's so many of our players said, I've never watched the Jags, I've never watched the Bills, but suddenly I have that quarterback. I want to watch that game.
Do you guys have data around actually, do you go to the NFL with a report and say, hey, look, we brought you, 10 million 18-year-olds this season?
We've done that analysis, and we can show it for every sport, that whenever we convert somebody to a daily fantasy player of that sport, we've shown significant increase, like anywhere from 40 to 60% increase in their consumption of that sport.
Oh, really, on average?
Yeah.
So you guys also are kind of interested in distributing some content. The NFL stuff is incredibly expensive. I'm going to assume perhaps at this point in your life cycle as a company, $450 million for Thursday Night Football is probably out of the budget. But you're doing something with TuneIn, which is radio specific. What is that?
And that's a really interesting one. What we really find is we have this demographic of very engaged sports fans. And so we've kind of said, well, how do we make their life easier? How do we bring them to sports? And so we know when somebody drafts their team which games they want to watch. We know they're interested in watching those games. And so we started to work with our partners, and a partner that we're now working with is a company called TuneIn, which is really the largest internet radio station. And what we do with them is that we then can link you through from the games to sign up to TuneIn so you can listen to those baseball games. So while you're watching the live scoring in our app, you click through and you sign up to TuneIn, and you can actually listen to those baseball games.
And so do you guys want to do more of that? I mean,
Absolutely.
am I going to be someday watching a television version of a game
I think
through
that's
FanDuel?
I think it's exciting. I think it's kind of a future sport. If you look at what the NBA is doing, where they actually bringing games, they're actually selling individual games. Again, it's something that we talked to them about. Is like, why don't, when I have my fantasy lineup, why can't I then go and grab those games and watch just those games, even if I don't have a subscription?
Yeah, is that an actual realistic business for you guys, given how expensive these rights are, though?
Yeah, but it's a different proposition because historically, or the way the ESPN or Turner use sports rights, is that they bid for those rights to sort of punch through and then monetize. We're going the other way around. We're actually saying to the NBA, we want to bring you players, we want to bring you fans, we want to bring people who want to buy the product.
Right.
And so we're bringing them our customers rather than using them to gain customers for us.
So you don't feel like it's cannibalizing?
No, we're growing the audience base.
We only have another couple minutes here. We've talked a lot about the NFL, we've talked about MLB, NBA. These are the popular sports that all of us are perhaps familiar with or probably familiar with. What's the dark horse fantasy sport that we don't know about? I mean, is there anything out there that's like, you'd be shocked at how many people love fantasy, fill in the blank?
Fantasy golf, we're seeing really fast growth on. That's been quite exciting. The other one that we're finding is, baseball has been more challenging over the years. Like fantasy baseball has just generally not grown. But we think that you can drive growth through new formats. And so a format that we just launched is called MLB Mix-Up, which is, everyone knows fantasy baseball, but here, instead of picking this full roster, you pick 2 pitchers, 3 outfielders, and every week we change the format. So this week the format is, you're not allowed to pick anybody from a team that has an animal in the name. So
okay.
No tigers or, and so you kind of you take that. And so we're bringing freshness into the game. And so, baseball is one of the oldest fantasy sports, but actually now we have a new format, and now we're having tens of thousands of people playing that new format, and I think that in itself can drive growth from existing sports.
Fantasy esports, fantasy video games, basically?
I think that, that format's out there. I think that's an interesting one as well. I think the market's seeing some growth, but generally I think it's more the traditional sports that, we're kind of excited about.
Do you guys do soccer?
We do soccer, and we're seeing good growth there as well, and that's mostly Premiership, Champions League.
Champions League. Before I let you go, by the end of this year, are you guys going to be ready to team up officially with your
that process,
at DraftKings?
we signed a merger with DraftKings last November, going through the process of the government and that, that's all on track. I think we said at the start, it'd be the second half of this year that we would expect to close. We're still on track for that.
Yeah.
It's a longish process, but we're on track.
I look forward to the new name, the blending of the two. Nigel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Thank you.